Alright, in the last lecture we have learned what's an array and why it is needed in programming. And in this lecture we will look at different types of arrays. So there are two types of arrays depending on the number of dimensions. So the arrays can be divided one-dimensional arrays and multi-dimensional arrays. So in multi-dimensional arrays you can see that it can be two-dimensional array, three-dimensional array, four-dimensional array, and it continues until n-dimensional array. So let's see what we mean by this. So the simplest type of array is linear array, which is also called one-dimensional array. It's an array with bunch of values having been declared with single index. One-dimensional array is the one which has a single row and multiple columns, as shown over here. So from here you can easily see that we have only one row over here and we have multiple columns that we declared over here. Now to access an element of one-dimensional array, we will use the array name and then the index of given value. Now here, let's say if we want to access this element over here, first we are writing the array name. So the array name is A, then the index of this element. So the index of this element is 2. So to access this element, we are writing A. In the squared parentheses, we write 2. Now if we want to access this element over here, we see that the index of this element is 5. So to access this element, we are writing array name, then the index. So by writing this, we can access this element over here. Now here you need to be very careful that the array indexes start from 0, and when we want to access any element of the array, first we put the array name, then the index of the element that we want to access. So this is how one-dimensional array looks like, and it consists of multiple columns and one row. Now let's look at what is a two-dimensional array. In one-dimensional array, we saw that it consists of one row and multiple columns. But in case of two-dimensional array, we have multiple columns and multiple rows, which represents a typical matrix. It's an array with bunch of values having been declared with a double index. So if you look at this picture over here, we can easily see that we have multiple columns and multiple rows. So if we look at two-dimensional array very carefully, we can easily see that two-dimensional array is composed of one-dimensional arrays. So if we take only first row, we can see that this is one-dimensional array, and this is second one-dimensional array, and this is third one-dimensional array. So by combining three one-dimensional array over here, we have got two-dimensional array. So this means that two-dimensional arrays consist of one-dimensional arrays. So you might be wondering why we need two-dimensional arrays when we have one-dimensional array. So as we progress in this course, you will see that there are some scenarios that two-dimensional arrays are very useful. Now let's see how can we access an element of two-dimensional arrays. So here we have index for columns and index for rows. So to access any given element, we are going to use these indexes over here. Now the first index that we are going to put is the row index, and the second index will be the column index. Now let's say if we want to access this element over here, the first thing that we are going to do, we need to identify row index. Now as you can see, it's located in the first row, and we know that the first row's index is 0. Then we need to identify the column index. So as you see, it's located at the index of 4. So to access this element, we are going to put array name, then index of row, then index of column. So index of row is 0 and the column index is 4. Now let's say if we want to access this element over here. Now the first thing that we are going to do, we need to identify row index. So as you see, it's located at the index of 2 and the column index is 5. So if we want to access this element over here, we will put array name, which is A, then index of row, which is 2, and the index of column, which is 5. So by using this combination, we can access this element over here. Now this is all for two-dimensional array. Now let's see what is this three-dimensional array. It's similar to two-dimensional array, but here we have depth. So this part is depth of this array over here. We can imagine a three-dimensional array as a multiple two-dimensional arrays. So you can see this part is one two-dimensional array, this part is another two-dimensional array, and depth part is another two-dimensional array. So in this case, it's combination of three two-dimensional arrays over here. In case of three-dimensional arrays, the values declared with 3 indexes, because as we said, we have depth over here. Three-dimensional array reminds us of a cube with the numbers on it. And if we look at carefully, we can see that each face of this cube is composed of two-dimensional array. which means that three-dimensional array is a combination of two-dimensional arrays. In real world, one-dimensional and two-dimensional arrays are used very broadly, but three-dimensional arrays are rarely used. So let's see how can we access the elements of three-dimensional array. Let's say if we want to access this element over here, which is 2 in the red phase, the first index we need to find out is depth index. Now as you see, the index of depth is 0. Then the next thing that we are going to do, we need to find out row index. Now as you see, it's located at the first row, which means that the index of row is 0. Then we will find out the column index. The column index is this one. So as you see, it's located in the second column, which is the index of 1. So to access this element, we will write depth index, which is 0, then row index, which is 0 also, then column index, which is 1. Now let's say if we want to access this element over here. Now in this case, first we need to identify the depth. As you see, it's located at the third depth. So this means that the index of this one will be 2. Then we need to identify row index, so it's in the first row, which is 0. Then we need to identify the column index. So it's located at the third column, which is index of 2. So to access this one, we will write depth index, row index, and column index. So by doing so, we can access this element over here. So if you combine everything together, our one-dimensional array will look like this, and two-dimensional array will look like this, and three-dimensional array will look like this. And mainly these are the three types of arrays that are used in programming broadly. Okay, with this we have come to the end of this lecture. So hopefully you have understood different types of arrays and you have understood how to access elements of different types of array. So see you in the next lecture.